Welcome back to my channel. I recently shared a picture of a batch of idlis that I had made from scratch over on Instagram, and I had loads of requests for the recipe. Today I'm going to share with you how I put together my idlis and dosas from scratch. Now I use the same batter for both the idlis and the dosas. It's just the consistency that changes up a little bit, and I'll explain more as we go along. Now the batter is a really simple batter and requires just a few simple ingredients. You're going to need some idli rice, some urad dal, as well as some fenugreek seeds. All of this is easily available at most Indian grocery stores. The idli rice will be labeled as such, so it'll be really easy to find, as will the urad dal. Urad dal is basically hulled and split black lentils. You'll find it in the same aisle along with the rest of the lentils. Typically, fenugreek seeds will be in the aisle that has all your spices. Now the batter is really simple to put together. Let's head straight over to the kitchen and let me show you how I put it together. So to make the batter, here I've got 3 cups of idli rice, 3/4 of a cup of urad dal, and 1 tablespoon of fenugreek seeds. This has been washed about 3 to 4 times till the water runs clear and drained off, soaked in fresh water for about 3 hours. After that has soaked, you're ready to grind it down. Today I'm using my Vitamix blender. However, in the past I have used my regular Philips mixer grinder, and that works well too. You just have to do it in smaller batches. But I must say this Vitamix works really well for tasks like this. So I'm going to do it in a couple of batches here as well. And I'm going to add a little bit of water like you can see here. It's important to have that little bit of water going so that you get a nice consistency to your batter. Now, like you can see here, there's not much water, just enough to get things moving. And you're going to grind that down until you're left with a paste. Now, one tip here is if you're using the same batter to make both a batch of idlis as well as some dosas, I like to leave the batter with a little bit of coarseness through it. So when you check your batter, you should be able to feel an ever so slight grit from the rice and the pulses in that batter. That's the stage that you're looking for, and this ensures you will get great idlis as well as beautiful crispy dosas. Now the next stage is to leave this batter to ferment. I'm using a big stainless steel stock pot over here, and I'm just going to pour out this batter into that stock pot. I'm going to continue this process until all of that rice and lentil mix has been ground. Now make sure that you've got a pot that's large enough, because this batter is going to expand as it ferments. Right now you can see it's a little below that 2-liter mark over here, and after it has had time to ferment, fermentation typically takes about 8 to 10 hours. And once it has had that time to ferment, you'll see that this expands a whole lot. Now it's a little over that 3-liter mark here. If your vessel's not large enough, it's just going to overflow and create a big mess that you're going to have to clean up. So make sure you go in for a pot or a vessel that's large enough. So let's talk about this fermentation process for a minute. There's no hard and fast rule about how long the batter needs to rest. As a guide, I take about 8 to 10 hours. And what determines whether it'll be more an 8 hours or a 10 hours is the temperature. This batter needs a slightly warm ambient temperature in order to ferment and rise, like most fermentation does. If it's a typical hot summer's day, I just leave it on my kitchen counter undisturbed, and the batter does its thing, and I've got it ready to go in about 8 hours time. If it's a colder day, like typically during winter over here in Sydney, I find that the batter needs a little more encouragement. So what I do is I switch on the oven at about 100 degrees for a few minutes, maybe just 2 or 3 minutes, just till that oven temperature mimics a warm summer's day. So you're not looking to overheat it, you're just looking to make it a hospitable environment for that fermentation to happen. And then all you do is turn that oven off, cover the pot that you're fermenting the batter in, pop it into the oven, and just leave it there for that 8-hour period. Now, what happens if it's not as warm as summer but not as cold as winter? Those kind of days, I don't preheat the oven, but I still leave the batter in the oven, in a cold oven, to do its thing. I find that that prevents any drafts from affecting the fermentation, and it gives me a good ferment. So these are just a few tips and tricks that I've learned along the way while I've experimented with the batter, and I hope this helps you too. Now, if you don't want to pop it in the oven, or if your oven's not large enough, feel free to leave it in a nice warm spot in your house. So once your batter is fermented, you're ready to use it either to make your idlis or dosas, as the case may be. I'm going to show you how I do both. So let's head back to the kitchen. The first thing that we're going to make with this batter today are idlis. I've got a little idli stand over here. This I picked from the local Indian grocery shop here in Sydney itself. You get different variants. This one's not extremely large, but it's not those miniature sizes that you get as well. And just for the two of us, it works fairly well. Start off by brushing a little bit of oil in each of those molds. This will help the idlis release a lot easier once they're cooked. At this point, I'm going to take away as much batter as I need to use immediately. You're going to have to play around with quantities depending on the size of your molds. And like you can see here, we've got some beautiful bubbling action going on in the batter, which means that it's light, it has aerated well, it has fermented well, and that's exactly what you want to see in a good batch of idli batter. So take out as much as you need and put a lid on, and if you're not using all of that batter at one go, at this stage, after it has fermented, you can pop this in the fridge and use it over the next 3 to 4 days. Now, working with that little batch that we've set aside, we're going to prep that to make our idlis. What this means is all you're going to do is season that up with a little salt and mix that through really well to help that salt distribute evenly through the batter. Don't overwork the batter. You still want to leave it nice and airy and fluffy. So just a few stirs through should do the trick. And then all you're going to do is ladle out some of that batter into each of those molds. Now, like you can see here, it's a beautiful, nice, thickish batter, and this works perfectly for idlis. I don't fill this all the way to the top. I fill it about 3/4 of the way because the batter will expand even further as it's steaming and cooking. With this particular stand of mine, I find that it's best to alternate idlis. Like you can see here, I kind of offset the position of the idli molds a little so that as the idlis rise, it doesn't get stuck to the mold just above it. I don't know whether this happens with all idli stands, but at least with this one, I find the need to do that. Otherwise, the idlis on the lower racks tend to get a little squished after making contact with the mold just above it. Now, at this point, this would go into a conventional idli steamer. I don't have one, so I'm just using the bottom of my pressure cooker. I've got a little water that has come to a boil and one of those loose bottom pie dishes that I flipped over just to keep this idli stand above the water. At this point, I'm just going to place the lid of the pressure cooker on top without locking it or sealing it. You can use any lid, and you're going to let these idlis steam off for about 15 minutes. If this is your first time making idlis at home, I would recommend checking it at the 12-minute mark by piercing one of them right through the center with a little toothpick, just like you would do a cake test. If it comes out clean, your idlis are ready. If it's still a little tacky, give the idlis a couple of minutes more. Now, once the idlis have cooked, take them out of the steamer, and I like to just give them a couple of minutes of resting time before I take them out of the mold. I found that that gives me the best results. To demold these idlis, you're simply going to use a butter knife and run that around the edge of the idlis, just like you can see me do here. And like you can see, they just pop right off without any trouble. And would you have a look at that? Isn't that a beautiful looking idli? At least to me, it's pretty damn good. So in the same way, go ahead, demold the rest of your idlis, and you're ready to serve up. And there you go, that's a gorgeous batch of idlis ready to be devoured. Let me just crack into one of them and show you what it looks like on the inside. Now, these idlis are usually enjoyed best with some piping hot sambhar and a chutney on the side. But when they're beautiful, fresh and hot like this, try them with some butter. It is one of my favorite ways to eat these idlis. And that's what the inside looks like. Like you can see, it's cooked all the way through. They're beautiful, spongy and light, not to mention absolutely delicious. Enjoy this with some sambar and chutney. I have shared recipes for both of these on the channel. If you haven't seen those yet, I'll leave a link in the description box below along with the recipe for the batter and the idlis. Today, as an extra bonus recipe, I'm also going to show you how I make my tempered coconut chutney. I prefer the good old version that I've shared with you before. My husband, however, absolutely adores this version. Now, this chutney is actually going to be made using some desiccated coconut. I know that sounds strange. I was a little skeptical when I first tried it out, but I was completely out of fresh coconut and I needed to make a chutney. So I thought I'd try it out with some desiccated coconut. So feel free to use either fresh or desiccated for this particular version, depending on what you have on hand. In here, I've got 1 cup of desiccated coconut. To this, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of dalia. This is just roasted chana dal that's really easy to find at most Indian grocery stores. And 1 heaping tablespoon of roasted peanuts. You can use either salted peanuts or unsalted, whatever you've got on hand. Simply adjust the level of salt in your chutney accordingly. We're also going to add 1 clove of garlic and 1 chilli. Chop it up roughly before you add it to your mixer. Add a little salt to taste and grind this up to a paste using a little water. Once you finish grinding, just take all of this chutney out into a bowl, and we're now ready to temper a few spices or make the tadka to drizzle over the chutney. I've got a little kadai just for these kind of things. If you don't have one like this, you can also use a small saucepan and that will work just as well. Into this little vessel, I'm going to put in about a tablespoon of oil. Use any neutral flavored oil here. To this, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of urad dal. And you're going to saute this dal over a medium heat until they develop a little bit of color and turn this beautiful golden brown. Make sure that you keep stirring it frequently so that it doesn't burn. Once that dal has just started developing a little color, you're going to go in with half a teaspoon of mustard seeds. Stir that through, and at this point stand back. I like to use a small lid as sort of a shield because those mustard seeds will splutter. Once those mustard seeds have finished spluttering, add in about 4 to 5 curry leaves and just roughly tear them up before you add them to the oil. Make sure that the leaves are 100% dry. There's not a trace of water on them because that oil will spit if there's any water in there. Now I've also added 1 Kashmiri chilli here that I've broken into about 3 pieces, and you're just going to toss everything through that oil and let everything heat up. Let all those flavors infuse into the oil. This just takes about a minute or so once you've added the curry leaves. Don't leave it unattended. You don't want any of this to burn. Once that's done, once you can smell those aromas, turn it off and immediately pour these tempered spices and all of that oil over the chutney that we prepared earlier. And immediately pop a lid on, set this aside for about 10 to 15 minutes. After the spices have rested and infused their flavor for about those 10 to 15 minutes, take the lid off and you can now stir everything through your chutney. And that's it. Your chutney is ready to be served. Onto the dosas. I'm going to spoon out some of that idli dosa batter that we prepped earlier into a bowl. Season with a little salt to taste and add a little bit of water. This is just plain water at room temperature. Now the quantity of water will depend on the consistency of your batter, so I can't tell you for sure how much water you're going to need over here. It will purely depend on how much water was added while grinding the rice and the lentils, as well as the process of fermentation. You're just looking for a batter with a nice, slightly thick pancake batter consistency. I'll show you what we're going for here. Like you can see, this is not runny. This way, you can ensure that you spread those dosas nice and thin, and that's the consistency that you're looking for. It should drip down in a steady stream like you can see here. Make sure that you mix that batter and water thoroughly so that you don't have clumps of batter in some places. Now I'm using my cast iron pan. What I've got over here is a little oil in a bowl and a silicone brush. I'm just going to brush a little oil onto the pan. Now for the first dosa, I use a little extra oil than I would for the subsequent ones, just to make sure that it doesn't stick. Make sure that your pan is nice and hot. You don't want it screaming hot, but it's got to be hot. Ladle some of that batter in the center of your pan, and using the bottom of that ladle, just spread the batter around in circular motions, moving in one direction, just like you can see me do here. Now, if you want a crispy dosa, that's the kind that we prefer, make sure that you spread this out nice and thin. If you'd like it fluffy on one side and crispy just on the bottom, then you can leave it a little on the thicker side. Now we're going to leave this to cook off for a couple of minutes. You'll know when it's ready to turn. The edges of the dosa will actually come away from the pan. You will see a few bubbles developing on the top. That just shows you that this dosa is cooking through. You will notice a little bit of color developing on the bottom of the dosa as well. Once the top is no longer sticky and tacky, most of it has dried off, brush a little bit of that oil over the top. This helps the dosas cook through and crisp up as well. And we're going to leave it to cook just for a little bit more. Now, once you can see the edges turning a little brown and the edges coming away from the pan, you know that your dosa is almost ready. Using a metal spatula, if you're using a cast iron pan, separate the dosa from the pan like you can see me do here. Being the first one, it tends to act a little stubborn at times, but that's no problem at all. It will still work out fine. And I also find that the dosa releases really easily once it's had an opportunity to cook through completely. Like you can see, we've got beautiful color on one side. We've got a nice golden brown. Now that's how we personally prefer our dosas. And we're going to continue cooking the rest of them up in the same way. Make sure you brush a little oil on your pan before you add the next lot of batter. Let's take another look at how this is done. Now you can serve the dosa as is with a little chutney. If you'd like, you can add Sambhar to this as well. But I prefer my sada dosa or plain dosa just with some beautiful coconut chutney. Break a little piece off, scoop up a little bit of that chutney and enjoy these dosas hot off the pan. You can also stuff it with a beautiful potato bhaji, aloo bhaji, and make this a masala dosa. For this, I use the same recipe that I've shared before for my aloo bhaji, with the exception that I don't use any cumin, any lime or sugar if I'm using it to fill up my dosas. I'll leave a link to that recipe as well in the description box below. So add in a little bit of that masala in the middle and serve it up with your chutney. And that, guys, is how simple it is to make your own idli dosa batter from scratch at home. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'll see you in the next video really soon. Bye.